My topic here is sensitive word versus anti-sensitive word in China's online discourse, and I approach it from a semiotic perspective. So first of all, some background information here. I don't know why it doesn't work here. Sorry. Sorry, the scale is out of range here. That's okay. So my research question is, how do Chinese internet users reinvent the so-called politically sensitive words to transmit meanings and the context of online discourses and exercise media citizenship? So with that research question, I looked at the background. So basically, we can say right now, in the Chinese internet, we see a compromised public sphere. And this idea is borrowed from Jürgen Habermas. So essentially, on the user side, you see internet enables users to engage in more online discourses and sensitizes their consciousness of their civic rights. For example, through the exposure to increasing social issues and international practices. But in response, the government has imposed a three-tier control over the cyberspace. It comes from institutional monitoring, internet service providers' user tracking, and user self-censorship. And yesterday, a lot of the speakers already touched on this topic, so I won't elaborate here. So basically, what my focus is on how do the Chinese internet users respond to this very comprehensive system of censorship. So I call their resistance semiotic resistance, and they come mainly in two forms. The first one is seemingly passive response, and the second one is a more proactive response. So for the first one, my definition of this response is that, although sensitive words such as Falun Gong or the Tibetan riot are considered as sensitive words and censored out in a lot of discourses, still users are using these words regardless. So as the result of that, here's an example. This is a blog post on Google's withdrawal from China. And in a while, you will see the Chinese translation, the original Chinese text, but I translated here for you. So I want to read it for you while you are, scanning the lines, because I think it's really dramatic. And today, on March the 23rd, 1910, the world's biggest sensitive word company, Sensitive Word, withdrew from Sensitive World. This is a sensitive word day. Sensitive word, sensitive word. As a sensitive word, I feel sensitive word for sensitive word. And all the sensitive word, please, sensitive words today, since soon enough, everything will be sensitive word. And I think this last sentence really makes a perfect sense. And so here's the Chinese translation here. You cannot see this, the whole paragraph, but you get an idea about what this is about. So what I want to say is that for a semiotic analysis here, using Roland Barthes' approach, I want to say that all these censored words, such as, in some cases, Google or the Chinese Communist Party, re-emerge dressed up in a uniform sensitive word. They're called 敏感词 in Chinese. So since the list of sensitive words is extensive, the signifier here, sensitive word, you see the sign, could embody as many signifiers as possible, or other signifiers. Because under the umbrella signifier of sensitive words, it can represent Chinese Communist Party, it can represent the Tibetan riot, and so forth. So granted, a problem of this is that you can't really distinguish the specific meanings of each the signifier. For example, in the paragraph above, you see all this bunch of sensitive words, but you don't actually see the actual words. What do each of the sensitive words say? The original meanings of each words are lost. But nevertheless, the context of a suppressing Chinese internet environment is transmitted throughout this discourse. And the second approach is a more proactive response. So instead of just going with the sensitive words, actually Chinese internet users are more involved in the creation of new words. I focus on the homophone substitution. For example, in Chinese, we will call the Jasmine Revolution 茉莉革命. So it was quickly censored out after after it came out. So what Chinese internet users used was to use homophones, words that sound the same but have different meanings, to substitute the original phrase. They come with several different versions, and the same thing for the name of Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese dissident. So we see the language play within one linguistic system and language play with multiple linguistic systems. You use the number 6, which is pronounced in Chinese as Liu, which sounds similar to Liu, the last name of Liu Xiaobo. So when you use Liu Xiaobo, 6 Xiaobo, it still makes sense to Chinese average readers. So through these examples, I want to say that here, compared with the first approach, it not only transmits, the context, the suppressing context of Chinese internet faced by the users, but also the specific meanings are also transmitted. You still know, that means Liu Xiaobo, that means the Jasmine Revolution. So this is more advanced strategy. So what I want to say that overall, as I mentioned before, some of these just transmit the context. Some of these additionally transmits the meanings of specific words. But overall, they have an effect of this communication of this environment, this ecology of Chinese internet. So the significance of this comes in 2 ways. The first one is semiotic resistance versus websites. Why do I mention this here? Because there has been, online resistance through the form of websites for a long, long time, since the early days of the internet. But this kind of a semiotic resistance, I argue, is creation of new language elements. So it is not limited to a specific locus. If you want to see some, dissident ideas for a website, you have to know their website address, www.x.com. But here, for semiotic resistance, you don't have to restrict yourself to this specific locus. You can go around places and you still see the same language transmitted through 6 Xiaobo. Everybody knows what that is. You don't have to go to this website to learn more about what he says about the Chinese government. A second in importance is here, so semiotic resistance versus citizenship. Here I borrowed idea from Dr. Yu Haiqing. So essentially, this kind of semiotic resistance helps to create a sense of media citizenship that exists in the practice of media, but not necessarily in the actual de facto citizenship. And that leads us to the discussion of the limitations, as you can see here, of this semiotic resistance. First of all, it's a media citizenship. So through the exercise of semiotic resistance, more and more people will realize their rights and they get sensitized about their civic rights. But the problem is, if they want to get their actions spilled over offline, they still have to face the lack of a de facto citizenship. So, there's an unequal mark between these two. And the second limitation is that legitimacy of semiotic resistance. Although internet has developed really fast in China, only 8% of the Chinese population are considered as regular internet users, and they're called the enlightened few, the netizens who know their rights and who want to let people, get people sensitized about their civic rights. So they're only the elite who are working on this, but there are a huge majority of Chinese population who still get to speak, who still do not get to speak on this forum. And that's also the problem of semiotic resistance as well. It's an elitist nature. And that actually wraps up my presentation. And I have some selected references here. And this has been directing me a lot in my formulation of this ideas for this paper. And thank you very much for listening.